We've been in this story in the book of Esther, and to give a sense of where we've come, I want you to know just a couple of chapters before this moment that we've just read this chapter from chapters 5 to 7, just one or two chapters before this, the plight of the Jews and of Esther and of Mordecai is in great peril. Now, let me even go further back just to give some background about what's happened here, right? So the setting of this entire book is basically Persia, and in Susa, which is the capital of Persia, and King Xerxes is this very capricious, whimsical king who changes, who's has drunken parties and changes his mind and makes monumental decisions sometimes, very flippantly almost, it seems. And one such decision that he had just made was that he had made a decree that all the Jews, a genocide would be enacted and that the Jews would be killed in his government. And this was a decree that was made. Now, I want you to get a sense, though. The Jews are this minority group in Persia. Now, some of them have already, and Jews having believed that they were the people of God, chosen by God, even as a small group of people, they had their land taken from them and they were in exile to Babylon, but some of them remained in this area of Persia. So they're this persecuted minority. This is who the Jews are. King Xerxes is this one with great power. And yet, kind of in the story of Esther, Esther is this Jewish girl who, again, part of this persecuted minority, who elevates to become the queen of King Xerxes. And her uncle, who's Mordecai, who's also Jewish, helps her in that manner, but he's someone who's marginalized. Now, this man that we read about was this man named Haman. Haman, of course, as we've been talking about week after week, is this evil man who's the second in power to King Xerxes. So he has Xerxes' favor, his ear, and he's the one that is so offended by Mordecai and Mordecai's unwillingness to bow down to him. And Mordecai's basically unwillingness to honor Haman and to treat him as if he were a god, that Haman is the one that pushes King Xerxes to enact this genocide against the Jews. And so there's this internal rivalry that happens between Haman and Mordecai. Mordecai is this powerless Jewish man who just so happens to be the uncle of Queen Esther. Meanwhile, Haman is this treacherous man who has already pushed the king to annihilate the Jews and is really out to punish Mordecai. Now, early in the chapter, we saw that Haman is in fact so bent on punishing Mordecai that he has this pole erected by which he will hang Mordecai. Now, what's crazy, if you were reading this passage along with us, is this is a crazy turn that happens in the story. Now, of course, Mordecai had gone to Esther and asked Esther to speak on behalf of the Jews, but she did that at her own peril, or at the own risk of her own peril, because she was not allowed to go speak to the king unless the king had invited her. And so Esther makes this brave move to go ahead and ask the king if she can meet with the king. And so prior to the passage that was just read, if I'm a Jewish person who's listening to this story, I'm basically on needles right now. I'm wondering what in the world is going to happen to my people. We've been a people that have already been oppressed. We've been in exile. We've lost everything. We thought that God was with us. We thought that God was for us. We've lost our land. We've lost our temple. Our families have been ruined. And now here we are on the cusp of genocide in Persia. And now we're in this situation where the king has given this decree that all the Jews will die. I mean, that's the situation in chapter 4. And yet, the craziest churn happens in this story. Like, without kind of, with all the drama and the anxiety of what is going to happen to this people that continue to get persecuted, we come to this passage and look at what it says. Go at once, the king commanded Haman, get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. Now, what happens here? Basically, the king, one night, he had kind of aroused awake and he started to look in the records of his own history and his own rule. And he finds that a guy named Mordecai had actually saved his life. And so because of this random evening that has aroused this king to awaken, he realizes Mordecai is someone who's should be honored and blessed. And so he actually, now this amazing churn of events, he tells Haman, Here's what I want you to do. Go and honor this guy named Mordecai. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is done for the man who the king delights to honor." I mean, do you see how ironic this move in the story is? Now, all of a sudden, Haman, who's been this treacherous, evil guy, who's been out to get Mordecai, he's now leading this horse and leading this procession to honor Mordecai. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Now look at the next slide at what happens here in the story. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and turned and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. Now, here's the other part of the story, right? Esther's about to speak on behalf of the Jews and basically beseech the king to reverse the decree of genocide. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked again, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Now look at what Queen Esther does. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing, to dare to push me to make this decree to destroy the Jews? Who is this man?" And Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. He's sitting right there." I mean, this story is crazy. It's taken this dramatic turn. Haman has gone from being this treacherous man who is out to kill the Jews and to humiliate and eradicate Mordecai. And all of a sudden, the tables have turned. Mordecai is now honored, and Esther now has come with this request and revealed that Haman is this man who has pushed for this genocide of the Jews. And she's now asking the king, "King, can you do something to Haman?" Now, what's so extraordinary about the book of Esther, which you may or may not have caught thus far in the story, is that the book is written, and it's this historical account of Esther and the Jews. And yet, God is never mentioned once in the story. Not once. There's no mention of God. There's no mention of God being the God of the people of Israel. There's no mention of how God is working or orchestrating or moving things. And yet, dripping through the text is this revelation that even when it seems like God is not there, he's nowhere to be found, the reality is God is working. We might not be able to see it, but God is working, even when it doesn't seem like it. To the point where the people of Israel, I can imagine being in such anguish. What's going to happen? Woe is me. So much pain and suffering has come to my people. Where are you, God? Well, God is working, even when it doesn't seem like it, even when he's not even mentioned, even when it seems like our backs are against the wall, even when it seems like he is just nowhere to be found. And yet, the revelation of this text, of the story of Esther, is that no matter how bad things get, no matter how we might walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that somehow God is there, and he's still working, and we just may not be able to see it. There's a part of me in the midst of this pandemic that has just been kind of waiting for this pandemic to end. I mean, you know, right? So much of the past few months has felt blended together. You've probably had this experience already, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, I think it was a week ago that I talked to my friend, but it was like 3 months ago. And like all time seems to be blended together in the midst of this pandemic. I mean, who's been there before, right? We've all been there where it just seems like this is this never ending season. And it's been full of twists and turns and sorrow and relief and sorrow again. And some of us have suffered in increasingly distressing ways. And we have walked with people through different life events as well. Some folks have had weddings postponed. Some folks have given birth and raised their children in the midst of this environment. Now, I mean, it has just been a crazy season. And I'll tell you, in my mind, so much of me wants to approach life this way. Man, God, just when this pandemic ends, I know you're going to do something amazing. And as I've been a pastor of our church, as I've been wrestling, God, I just know that in the midst of this season, once this pandemic ends, on the other side of this, God, you're going to do something amazing, do something incredible. Just know it. I'm believing, I'm trusting in that. But what if God has been working just right now in your life and in mine? He's doing something. We may not be aware of it. And his work in your life and his work in my life is not for a few months from now, or from a few weeks from now, or even a few days from now. What if God's working is for you today, right now? Right now. He's present and he's working. And we can jump on to the story that he's looking to write in your life and in mine. A quote that I come to time and time again is written by this author named Paula Darcy. And she has this quote. She says, God comes to you disguised as your life. Not as someone else's life. Not as your life 20 years from now. Not as your life 5 years ago. But as your life right now. That right now, whatever anxieties, fears, joys, pleasures you're carrying, whatever addictions you've been saddled with today, whatever relational conflict you're in right now, whatever anxieties around finances in your workplace or work in general, what if God was coming to you right now disguised as your life? When I first read this quote, I was actually in a season of unemployment. I was in between jobs. I had left kind of my job that I had worked in for 10 years, and I had resigned. I was kind of going through a season of depression, and I honestly felt very, very lost. And I remember coming across this quote, and this quote was, God comes to you disguised as your life. And it was interesting because it caught me right in a season when I was thinking, when am I going to get out of this predicament? And when I read this quote, I was like, wow, what if God is working right now, just in me, right now, in this season of depression, of unemployment, of this land in between? What if God is working right now? And I just have to be awakened to that reality. What if God is working right now? Because what the story of Esther tells us is that God is always working. The question is, are we aware of it? Even when it doesn't seem like it, God is always working. So much of me wants God. I think he works when I'm on the other side of the valley, when I'm on the other side of the hill, or when I think back and I say, oh, that's when God was working. Well, what if God was working right now, today, wherever you are, wherever you're sitting? What if God's trying to get your attention? Trying to say, right now, I want you to start beating your addiction. Right now, I want you to start confessing the ways in which greed or lusts or whatever else it is that has captivated so many of us in whatever respective season that we're in has gotten a hold of us? What if right now God is saying, I want to work on you and your relationship with your spouse or with a loved one. I want to work on you right now with your bitterness and your heart of unforgiveness and hardness. I want to work right now on you and kind of how you handle your money and your whether or not you're living as someone who's free from the love of money. I want to work on you right now as it relates to just laying down and surrendering your sense of control. What if the invitation to you was right now, was today? God comes to you disguised as your life. You know what's interesting? Because again, here I am, I'm talking about how God is working and orchestrating behind the scenes. Now, some of us might say, well, like, if God is doing that, then what kind of agency do we have as human beings? Why in the world are we even making decisions and all this stuff when God is the one that's orchestrating and moving things? Well, you know, it's, again, so beautiful about the story of Esther. And it's this pivotal scene that we read about last week. It's this pivotal scene where Mordecai has gone to Esther. Now, check out what it says. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, now this is after Mordecai had heard that a decree had been given to destroy the Jews. Look at what happens. Esther's words were reported to Mordecai. He sent back this answer. This is what Mordecai says to her. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. Now, look at this underlined portion. He says, for if you remain silent at this time, Esther, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. I mean, this is what Mordecai is saying. Basically, if you step in or you don't step in, I'm confident that deliverance will come. Why? Because again, the people of the Jews believe that this is who God is, even though he's not mentioned. But look at what Mordecai challenges Esther with. He says, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. For this moment, right now, everything that's been converging in your life has come to this unique crossroads, to this unique moment. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And I love this phrase that Esther gives. She basically says, this invitation to step into this divine calling, if I perish, I perish. It's with such courage that she steps into this moment. Now, what I love about this passage is it highlights that, yes, even though God is working, there's great humility because we recognize God is working. There's great humility. That's why Mordecai basically says, listen, deliverance will come. But there's also this invitation to courage because Mordecai is like, but you've been given a life right now, in this moment, right now, in your situation, in your financial predicament, in your relational predicament, right now. This is the life that you've been given for such a time as this. And the question for you and for me is this: will you seize your divine destiny? Will you seize it? Will you seize your divine appointment? Will you say, yes, God, yes, right now I'm open to your call on my life. Not when this pandemic is over, not when so-and-so changes their behavior or their life. But right now, will you embrace your divine appointment, your divine destiny? Now, of course, this is in some ways paradoxical. Some of you might say, how do I see something when it's divinely appointed? Well, this is the mystery of God. This is how God works. Søren Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher, he has this phrase where he says, life is lived forward but understood backward. And isn't it true that today we have the agency and the freedom to make our own decisions. But when we look back on a certain time and we say, wow, the fingerprints of divine destiny or appointment are all over that. Have you ever had that experience before? And here's what Kierkegaard is saying is that this is what we do. We live forward, but then later on we realize, wow, God's fingerprints were all over this. And the question that I have for you and for me is, will you seize your divine appointment? Because whether it's 5 months from now or a year from now, what is the story you will tell others about what God did right now? Will it be a story of, oh yeah, story is, man, I watched so many new Netflix series. And in fact, I signed up for Prime Video and Hulu as well. And I just jumbled it all together. And I gorged so much on like media and content. Sorry if that hit close to home for some of us, but what will the story be that you tell? And what if the story is right now, God is inviting you for such a time as this to start making a pivotal decision, to change the trajectory of your life, to step into your divine destiny. Maybe it is taking a step of boldness. Maybe it is humbling yourself and realizing that all that you've been given, your job, your career, all of these things, what if it were meant for the good of others? What if it was for a time such as this? You know, there's this passage that the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Galatia. And I love this passage. He basically says this: let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Feels like we've been in this season forever, and yet it feels like it's been a blink of an eye. And what if today we made the choice? Let us not become weary in doing good. Let us, if anything, let us not disengage, which is everything that I want to do right now. I want to disengage with whatever activity God is doing. I just want to disengage, and I just want to leave that to others, and I just want to just make it to the other side. And what if today God is calling you to press deeper, to be invited in? Now, how does Paul have the audacity to say, we will reap a harvest? How does he know that? You see, it's because he lives in light of the Jesus story. The Jesus story is the one where it's not our great effort and giftedness that ends up saving the day, but it's in fact the story that we center our lives around, the story of a great Savior named Jesus, who comes and lives and dies and actually walks through the valley of the shadow of death. But he resurrects from the grave so that we might know that even if we walk in the valley of the shadow of death, we don't have to fear any evil, for he is with us, and he is for us, and he is working, even when you and I can't see it. I'm going to pray for us to close our time, and I want to invite you, if you're someone who needs prayer today, it's just been hard to figure out if God is working. Maybe you're overwhelmed as a parent. Maybe you're overwhelmed as a single person right now and feeling the pangs of just loneliness. And maybe you've been searching and wondering whether God is truly working. I want to invite you to just drop a P in front of your name so that one of us can pray with you. And we would love to pray with you. We would love to remind you and to invite you into a story that God is working out in your life and in mine for such a time as this.